We've been referring back to Bitcoin a lot since it's one of the oldest and most popular blockchain systems, so it's subject to a lot of talk about scalability, especially since it's been studied extensively and many scalability solutions have been proposed for it. Again, to recap Bitcoin, transactions have very long delays. On average, 6 confirmations on a transaction will take 1 hour. Transaction fees are also pretty inconsistent, historically during winter 2018 becoming insanely high. Here's a graph of the daily transaction fees in US dollars per transaction. As you can see, in winter 2018, transaction fees spiked to $37 per transaction. Nowadays, it's just around a couple cents. But the inconsistencies and also the upper bound in the possible transaction fees just comes to show that Bitcoin really isn't economical for low-value items. I drink a lot of coffee, and I don't want to be paying up to 10 times what I normally pay. So the idea here is that since transaction fees are so expensive, clearly just using the blockchain at all is expensive. Why can't 2 users, Alice and Bob, make payments between themselves without always needing to consult the blockchain? Perhaps they could transact amongst themselves for a bit. Perhaps Alice is a regular customer at Bob's coffee shop, and then only consult the blockchain every once in a while to settle an aggregate amount. After all, paying a single transaction fee for what was actually a month's worth of transactions, for example, would be pretty good. We could call this a private payment channel, just between 2 users, Alice and Bob. So how would we actually implement a private payment channel between Alice and Bob? Well, they could maintain a private balance sheet, tracking each of the transactions they conduct amongst themselves. Initially, the private balance sheet would start off with however much money both Alice and Bob have set aside. So in the diagram below, say Alice starts off with 10 Bitcoins and Bob has 5 Bitcoins. After purchasing an extremely rare cup of coffee, Alice pays Bob 2 Bitcoins, and they both agree to update their balance to the following. Alice now has 8 Bitcoins and Bob has 7. Say again that Alice is a regular customer at Bob's super high-end coffee shop, and they'd like to settle their net balances weekly, so they'd consult the blockchain then. This way, they could avoid having to undergo the high fees and long confirmation times of regular on-chain transactions. This is how Alice and Bob's payment channel would look like. First, Alice and Bob open a private balance sheet, letting it be known that this is the case on the blockchain. They both start off with some initial balances. Alice and Bob then make several private transactions amongst themselves. When Alice and Bob want to close their private payment channel later on, they publish it and their net balances on the blockchain. So we'd want to be able to create blockchain enforceable contracts between users. This could be done with smart contracts, and in Bitcoin's case, be written in Bitcoin script. This way, we can encode the proper functionality so that neither party in a payment channel can cheat each other. In blockchain, we call them payment channels, but we generally also mean to specify the technical mechanism by which we achieve payment channel functionality, and that's with hash time lock contracts, or HTLCs. HTLCs use tamper evidence techniques to make sure that neither party cheats, and for integrity of information, hence the H in HTLC, standing for hash. The TL stands for time lock, and is the name for the mechanism by which we can schedule an action in the future, for example, the refunding of transactions, implementation details. And we would like to implement this as a contract of some sort on a blockchain system. The goal of this all is to enable a bidirectional payment channel so that both parties in a payment channel can pay each other with the guarantees of a contract governing all actions, including incentives for not cheating. So let's walk through a short little demo of a payment on a payment channel. Say 2 users, Alice and Bob, set up a payment channel, and this is the initial state, state 0 of their private balance sheet. To do so, they need to create essentially a 2 of 2 multisig between them, and each pays in their initial amounts. For example here, Alice has 10 Bitcoins and Bob has 0, for a total of 10 Bitcoins in this payment channel. There exists an issue of trust within the payment channel though. We don't want to require Alice to completely trust Bob in the payment channel, so we can design around that. We won't go too deep into the implementation details of HTLCs, but suffice it to say that at any point in time, either Alice or Bob can attempt to exit out of the payment channel. What they need for this is to get both parties to agree, or wait a large number of blocks, say 1,000 blocks. So say Alice pays Bob 3 bitcoins. Now we're in state 1, where Alice has 10 bitcoins and Bob has 3. Again, this is all done off-chain, so for this transaction, neither Alice nor Bob had to incur high transaction fees or long confirmation times. So if both Alice and Bob are happy with their transactions, they can at any point post back to the blockchain to settle their final balances. And this is done with each other's signatures and secret information. On the other hand, to bring back the issue of trust, say Alice and Bob don't trust each other, and for good reason. So Alice paid 3 bitcoins earlier, but now she wants to revert back to an earlier state, to before she paid Bob the 3 bitcoins. She does this by attempting to exit the HTLC with their previous balances. However, the only way she can do this without Bob's signature is to wait 1,000 blocks. And at any time, Bob can see that Alice is trying to cheat him out of his money, and then claim all the funds in the channel, an incentive to prevent cheating. Now, some key observations from our payment channel demo, and of payment channels in general. Firstly, we have a mechanism for countering cheating. If Alice and Bob are in a payment channel and one of them is trying to cheat, the other can always override and take all the money in the deposit. And that's assuming that at least one of the two of them will try to cheat the other. If Alice and Bob always cooperate, then they can stay in their payment channel however long they like and keep transacting. Alice and Bob never have to touch the blockchain except for when they want to create the payment channel in the first place, and also at the very end, whenever they choose, to settle their final balances after their series of transactions. And of course, the main motivation for payment channels. It enables huge savings in terms of how much we have to interact with the blockchain. We saw that the blockchain was inherently slow, and sought to use it as infrequently as possible. With payment channels, we only need 2 transactions on the blockchain, one to initiate the payment channel and one to settle the final state. With only 2 transactions on the blockchain, we can support any arbitrary number of local transactions between any 2 users, Alice and Bob. And depending on how many times and how frequently Alice and Bob transact, the scalability could be pretty high. There remain some issues though. Firstly, both participants, Alice and Bob, need to have capital locked up in the HTLC before they can send money to each other. And the money is locked up such that it can only be used in the HTLC, meaning that if Alice transacts with many people other than Bob, then she can't afford to lock up all that she owns. Also, she has to make sure that she doesn't run out of capital in the existing HTLC. If she locks up 10 bitcoins to begin with and purchases a 2 bitcoin coffee every morning from Bob, then she should probably look into locking up more capital next time she and Bob enter HTLC. It's the most benefit for the underlying blockchain that Alice and Bob conduct as many transactions as possible off-chain before settling the final balance on the blockchain, since that was our main goal. So we would want HTLCs to have bidirectional payments as much as possible. And that ties right into another issue, which is that with the payment channel enabled by an HTLC, we're only making it easier for Alice and Bob to send money between themselves. So what if Alice wants to send money to Charlie, but doesn't have or want a payment channel set up between herself and Charlie? Especially if Alice only intends on transacting once or twice with Charlie, it's not worth to set up a payment channel. We could potentially set up a network of payment channels, and as long as Alice is connected to Charlie somehow in the network, she can send him money.